Hey, what is up guys, and welcome back to Telling Time. So, as a new year has dawned upon us, I thought that I would introduce a new series which would be about reviewing my current collection and sharing my thoughts on my future watch collecting aspirations. I think this series is as much for myself as it is for you guys, as I can gather my thoughts and see how I want to slowly grow my collection. And subsequent entries in this series will show whether I was able to stick to the plan or if I go off course. This video might be a bit rambly and long as I talk about my watch collecting philosophy and personal interests, but I hope it can be interesting to you, so sit back, relax and enjoy the chat. To give a bit of a background about myself, I've been a watch enthusiast and collector for about 5 years now, and my watch collecting philosophy I would say is more geared toward brand history and story, as I find myself gravitating towards brands that have a significant history, and I like to collect pieces that also have a significant story to my life. But before we begin, let me reveal some of my ground rules for my collection, because as any watch enthusiast will know, if we have free reign without worrying about the money, I'd probably end up with 10 Seikos in my collection and over 50 watches. So my watch collecting ground rules are as follows. 1. I like to collect each watch from a different brand, so as tough as it is, I try, keyword being try here, to avoid buying 2 or more watches of the same brand because, like I mentioned, otherwise I'd end up with multiple Seikos and Tudors and I'd never see the end of it. Second, I like to collect each watch with a different complication. Like the previous rule, this one tries to keep the versatility in my collection so that I can wear different watches for different occasions. Because again, otherwise my collection is definitely gonna end up being 10 dive watches and that's it. Third is one I mentioned earlier, and it's I'd like to have each piece to have a significant history and significant story in my personal life. I personally think that this approach is one of the best ways to collect watches and makes for an authentic collection that is true to yourself. And lastly, I'd like to keep the total number of watches in my collection between 8 to 10 watches. Realistically, I have only one wrist and limited wrist time for each watch, and to be honest, I think that even 8 to 10 is pushing it in terms of having a collection that I would really wear equally and rotate through. In an ideal world, I would want a 6 watch collection, but I really don't think I can settle for 6 and miss out on so many wonderful watches, so for now it's 8 to 10 max. So before I rant on any further, let's get into my current collection. I currently have 8 watches in my collection, which you can see on screen now, but there are a few that I would say is not part of my core collection and on the chopping block, which are my Seiko SNE 583, Dan Henry 1962, and Alpha Explorer. And I don't really consider my G-Shock as part of my core collection as it's quite low maintenance and so it's more of like a side companion. If you're interested to know more about my collection, you can check out my 2024 SOTC video. So I think my collection will start and continue with my forever keepers, the Cartier de Santos Medium and the Rolex OP34. If you've seen my SOTC video, you would know that these are my wedding watches, and for that reason, I hope to keep these pieces as staples in my collection. And I do also like that these watches are quintessential watches of their time, the Santos being one of the first wrist watches, and the OP being the first waterproof watch that started the Rolex legacy. I hope that I never get into a situation where I need to part with one of these. So the number 1 and 2 slot in my collection will be for my Santos and OP. The next slot in my collection is my trusty Tudor Pelagos 39. I got this piece back in 2021 and ever since I've just fallen more and more in love with it. The draw of this watch comes from my love for the Tudor brand and wanting a Tudor Submariner, but at the same time a capable modern dive watch. And trust me when I say I've put this watch through its paces, to the best of my abilities at least. I like to think that this watch reflects my style, no nonsense and practical but still with its own flair. And is this watch another forever piece? I think so, to be honest. It fills the dive watch slot in my collection very well, and I think that this watch marks a shift in my collecting to more upscale pieces. Perhaps the only other watch that could ever replace it would be a no-date Submariner. You know, with the overhyping of the sub I used to have something against it, but at the end of the day, you can't deny that it's one of the pinnacles of modern dive watches, from its finish to build quality to style, and even bezel action. But for now, I think that the Tudor Pelagos 39 will be staying for the foreseeable future. Next up is my Dan Henry 1962 in the number 4 slot. This was one of the earlier pieces in my collection and fills the chronograph slot. And in my opinion, for the price, it fills this very well. It's got great build quality and vintage styling of the Universal Genève Panda chronograph that I wanted. But as you travel down the rabbit hole of chronograph watches, of course, I would want to end up with the luxury chronograph piece eventually. And as a lover of watch history, I'm so torn on my chronograph slot because there are so many great stories there. Those who know about the story of the race to create the first automatic chronograph would know of Tag, Zenith, Breitling, and Seiko. And of course, the competition for the first chronograph in space brings Omega, Longines, and Rolex into the picture. So for my endgame chronograph piece, I'm still undecided because it's a very tough competition. You have the Breitling Navitimer, Omega Speedmaster, Tag Heuer Carrera, Zenith El Primero Original, and the Longines Avigation Big Eye in the running. I won't get too in depth into these, but I do have a goal to get my endgame chronograph for my 30th birthday, so I'll have to ruminate over which one I like the most until then. And seeing as I have that goal in mind, I think for now I'll keep my Dan Henry 1962 until then. Next up is slot number 5. Slot number 5 is not one I currently have in my collection, and that is an integrated sports watch. Again, with the overhyping and trends of integrated sports watches, I never thought that I wanted one, but as I tried more and more, I started liking that integrated style and versatility. I have a strong contender in mind for this slot, and that is the Nevada Grenchen F77. I had never experienced this watch in person in Australia before, but I have since had a few experiences with it, and I'm growing more and more fond of it. The 37mm case fits so well on my wrist, and I love the overall vintage styling of it. And besides, I personally just like Nevada Grenchen as a brand. Other contenders I had considered are the Yamaha Urban Traveler or Wristmaster, but having experienced them in person and hearing other things online, I don't think I want to deal with the QC issues that come with them. And in terms of endgame integrated sports watches, I think that the most desirable ones are probably out of my reach, and I don't really gravitate towards them. But some of the high-end ones that I'm drawn to would be the new IWC Ingenieur and Zenith Defy Skyline. Both are Genta-inspired designs, but so is the F77. So I feel like and hope that I will be happy with the F77 for a long time. Next up is my Seiko SNE 583 in the number 6 slot. I bought this watch without much thought, to be honest, but I do quite like how it wears, and the fact that it's a solar watch means it's always accurate. I wear this watch when I'm doing some more hands-on activities or when I don't want to risk it with my Pelagos 39. And I know that one of my ground rules is having different complications, but if you've ever gone down the rabbit hole of the history of dive watches, you'll know that there's simply too many significant dive watches to settle for just one. So to acknowledge that, I think I want my number 6 slot to be a vintage dive watch reissue. But the bigger issue here is that there are just too many to choose from. As you see, this slot is the most hotly contested, with watches like the Seiko Willard reissue or SJE 093, Squale 2001 or 1521, the Zodiac Super Seawolf and the Doxa Sub 300. In fact, I was very close to buying the Squale 1521 multiple times, but I've never pulled the trigger because another one of these models just keep popping up every time. But I think at the end of the day, I probably want to keep a Seiko in my collection because the Seiko SRPD 5KX was the watch that started my watch enthusiast journey. And I like the thought of always keeping a Seiko diver in my collection because of it. So this slot will probably end up with one of the big three from the Willard 62 Mars or Marine Master reissue. The only problem is which model to pick. Coming in the number 7 slot is my most recent pickup, the Bozell X Second Sydney Diver. I picked up this watch after being impressed by Christo and Bozell at a watch fair, and without realizing I had broken my own rule and grown my dive watch count to 3 now. So although I really like this watch, it might end up on the chopping block someday, unfortunately. But for now, I do seriously like this watch because it fits the slot of a black PVD watch with a bit of fun style, and it does mean a lot for me to be connected to Cristo and my home in Australia through this watch. In terms of what I would replace this with, I do really want one GMT watch in my collection because I like the story behind the GMT watch and how it represents the golden age of flight and travel. And the front runners so far for me are the Fortis 39 Flieger and the Tudor Black Bay 58 GMT, or in the endgame, the Rolex GMT Master. If you've watched some of my recent travel videos, you will know that I like the idea of a Pepsi bezel GMT because of the OG GMT Master, and I do believe that a Pepsi version of the Tudor Black Bay 58 GMT is coming, so that one might be a perfect pickup for me to fill this slot. And in the number 8 slot, we have my Alpha Explorer. This watch was also one of my very first purchases, and to be honest, I don't really consider it as part of my collection anymore, but it does represent for me an everyday 3-hander watch. And when I do wear this watch, I feel very comfortable with it on, with its unpretentious and understated look. So I'll be looking for a similar feeling watch to replace it. The front runners in this slot for me in the mid tier are the Longines Heritage MN and Tissot Heritage 1938. And in the endgame, the IWC Mark XX. And a bit of a wild card, the Panerai Luminor 40. I think ultimately, I'd like to end up with the Mark XX because I had a colleague that owned this watch and it just looked amazing on his wrist every time. There's just something about the modern IWC Pilot's watch that is reminiscent of the vintage age but exudes luxury quality. But the Panerai Luminor is also a tough competitor, as after a recent trip to Europe, I'm getting slowly more smitten with Panerai watches. With now 8 watches on the list, I think I'll end it there. But I'll quickly elaborate on some more honorable mentions of the watches or brands that I really like but don't know where to fit in my collection. First is a Tooltastic watch. I'm an engineer by profession, and I've always noticed that my seniors and colleagues always gravitate towards tool-like watches such as Breitling and Omega, something that just really speaks to engineering. So I do like watches such as the Breitling Avenger or Chronomat, Planet Ocean 39, or even the Fortis Novanaut for that feel. Another watch that I think I want is a Grand Seiko Spring Drive. Again, it's just a marvel of engineering, and because I like Seiko so much. And finally, I do think that I want a dress watch in my collection for formal occasions and times where I just feel like wearing a dress watch. Lately, I've been eyeing the Louis Erard x Cedric Jonah Le Regulator watch, and from seeing videos and images of this watch, it just looks like a marvel of watchmaking. So I'll finish this video off with the prospective directions that my watch collection can head in the short and long term. If you enjoyed this video from me, make sure you subscribe and let me know in the comments what you thought of my watch collecting philosophy and if you have any tips or suggestions. If you guys are having troubles with your own collection or choices, I would love to discuss in the comments. But as always, I'll see you again in the next video.